In today's video, I will be giving my answer for why I believe Westeros has irregular seasons based on a lot of what we have been talking about recently on the channel. If you are new to the channel, don't worry, at the end of this video there will be a link to a playlist in the end screen where you can get yourself caught up on anything that sounds interesting that I mentioned throughout this video. But now, back to the point of Westeros having irregular seasons, because this is going to be important to the story. In a spake Martin entry, there is an interview that George RR Marting gave where someone asked him about the irregular seasons, and he said, it was back in, I believe, 2004, 2005, he said that he couldn't say why there are irregular seasons because that would be telling, but there would be a magical explanation for it, not a scientific explanation for it, and that seems to basically very clearly imply there is a reason, and we will find out the reason in our story, and I would say it's actually going to be pretty important to the story that they get the seasons back in order and make them regular again. So basically, to quickly recap everything that is relevant to this theory that we have covered so far in the series, we have put forth the evidence for the idea of a corrupt heart tree that is basically functioning like a world tree for this world. Potentially all of the weirwoods themselves being connected at the roots through like some giant root network that runs throughout the entire planet by this point, which would make sense to me, right? That seems like what George has set up for all of the weirwoods to be connected, and they connect to like this central root system, and that's why, you can't get a weirwood to take up in the top of the Erie because the roots can't burrow down deep enough into this root system, which isn't existing all the way up in the mountains. There's more evidence for it, but that's just one point that kind of sticks out to me. I think that's a good interpretation of the weirwoods, is that they are all a big connected network. Now, they are called heart trees, and we have speculated that they pump water into the wall because trees are phenomenally good at pumping water up, and especially very tall trees. Scientists at points were confused when they figured out how do these insanely tall trees pump this water all the way up their trunks, and trees are just phenomenally good at it. I think it had to do with you have water in the tube the entire time that it forms, and it just builds this really good forever suction to just pull water from underground and pump it to insanely high heights. Anyway, trees are really good at water pumps. And so we believe that the heart trees within the wall are pumping the water up into the wall. And the thing is, there's a lot of symbolism that there are these undying ones trapped around the heart of winter. These corrupted heart trees, this corrupt world tree type thing that is going on. And when I say the weirwoods are a corrupted world tree type thing, that's because the weirwoods are always, especially in the early books, described as incredibly scary. Catelyn's scared of the tree, she feels it watching her, and she doesn't like to look at it. Then Bran tries to avoid the heart tree as he goes through the Godswood. He says it's always scared him. He says trees ought not have eyes or leaves that look like human hands. So, these trees are pretty creepy, right? And you should really look at the weirwood organism as a world tree analog because, they believed that the world trees all connected through their roots, I'm fairly certain. I'm not an expert on this, so take everything I say with that little grain of salt that I've looked this stuff up, but I'm not an expert. But the thing that they would do with these trees is they had ones. One of them reminds you a lot of the Godswood at Winterfell. It overlooks a pool of water, and they would sacrifice people in that pool by forcing their body underwater, and they knew the sacrifice was a good sign if the pool would swallow their body to where it would never come back up. So it would get sucked down under into the roots of these trees, and they were literally feeding blood to these trees, right? They would do sacrifices at their world trees. So the weirwoods are essentially modeled off of that. It's an old religious custom, right? And I don't think George is doing the typical fantasy thing where it's the more natural, older religion was the better one. I think he's doing a thing where he's no, all of these religions are pretty bad. All of them are doing things that are pretty messed up. the old ways are kind of messed up. The old gods are a giant blood sacrifice cult to these trees. That's not going to be like glorified in the end, probably, right? I would assume. That's just me thinking with the way that the story seems to be going. So in my mind, a picture starts to form here, right? Because you now have the world that is run on blood magic and shadow binding. But you have these ancient tales of people like Garth the Green, or people who could do green magic, right? And if Brandon the Builder built the wall in the way we speculate, growing a giant line of incredibly tall weirwoods coast to coast, and then having them pump up the water, and then strapping people to them and doing the spell that you see done in the television show to create the others, with someone strapped to a weirwood, you merge the consciousness and create this undying spirit that is a magical power source and a cold source. Well, in that case, that's how you have the wall built, and that was essentially done using green magic, but then they corrupted this giant line of weirwoods to use it for blood magic, which is why in today's story, potentially, you don't see green magic being done the way it was done way back in the Age of Heroes, right? Because in the Age of Heroes, to get power, they like corrupted the world tree, right? It could in some way be like George doing a little commentary on like the like sort of fantasy trope and video game trope of like the hero kills a god to take this incredible power for himself, and then what happens to the world then? George is asking 8,000, 10,000 years later when that, okay, so these heroes, corrupted the world tree, took this godly power and corrupted it to give it to themselves, and then passed it down through their family. So now their family has ruled for 8,000 years, and the world is in a pretty bad state because its natural magic source and power source was corrupted and used for blood magic and used for shadow binding and used for this icy entrenchment of power and this one single family ruling for thousands of years. And now we're going to have someone who's going to have to deal with the repercussions of that in Bran and, all of our other characters who are going to help end the old ways. What George kind of seems to be setting up then is this idea that, yeah, the weirwoods are creepy. Trees ought not have eyes or leaves that look like human hands. Trees ought not drink blood. You probably shouldn't be giving blood to your magic trees to gain power. That seems like, a bad thing to do, human sacrifice. Like, maybe in the end, that's going to be considered in some way a good thing, but personally, I would be confused if it's not a refutation of this idea. So if we then accept that the weirwoods, as we have seen them in the show and as we see them used by the old ways, and potentially as they exist within the wall with these icy undying ones strapped to them, melded with them forever, is a corruption of the green magic world tree organism, well then I think that could give a pretty direct explanation for what is going on with the seasons, especially when we consider what it is also potentially being called, if Bran's vision is seeing what we think it is, the inside of the wall, and the undying ones who are strapped to it, the point of Bran's story. If the heart of winter is this heart tree that is corrupted within the wall, right? Then we potentially have a good explanation there. What are seasons? They are the heartbeat of the planet. If this heart tree organism is like a part of the heart of the planet and it is corrupted, then we have an irregular heartbeat situation going on with the planet. It is a magical explanation for the irregular seasons. They are an irregular heartbeat due to the corrupted heart tree, the world tree analog in Westeros. Now, this is my personal favorite explanation for the irregular seasons because of a lot of factors. I think it fits really neatly with what George has set up, with a lot of the word choice he has used, heart tree, heart of winter, and when you go back and you look at old passages, viewing the idea of the planet as a living thing with a heartbeat that is corrupted, a lot of other things start to make sense. Like the Faceless Men describe for Arya the 14 flames as living mountains with veins of molten rock and hearts of fire. So they're volcanoes, but they're living things with veins and hearts. And potentially, right, the slaves within them are very close to what we have speculated the Undying within the wall are. They are slaves being used in the power source of the Valyrian magic, in the same way that the Undying ones in the wall may be being used to power the Old Ways magic and the blood magic there. If that is the case, we have a potentially Heart of Summer, Heart of Winter situation going on, and maybe the two need to get in sync for the heartbeat of the planet to line up. And I can only assume that the Heart of Summer, if that is what the 14 Flames are, would be uncorrupted after the doom of Valyria, right? It blew all the Valyrians out of there, and now it can go back to erupting at its regular schedule, the Heart of Summer, going back to its natural fiery magic state, and potentially the Heart of Winter going back to its natural icy magic state in the end of our story, when they deal with the problem of this corrupted heart tree that is potentially located at the Night Fort. The reason I have to speculate that the Heart of Summer is already uncorrupted is because I don't think we have time in our story for anyone to go and fix a volcano, unless we're saying that Drogon flying away with Dany's body at the end of Season 8, he's about to go drop her in a volcano, and that's going to uncorrupt the Heart of Summer. But, I don't think we have time to deal with any volcanoes being fixed in Valyria, so we're going to assume, for just pacing purposes, that we're focusing on fixing the Heart of Winter to get it back in focus with the Heart of Summer. But the Heart of Winter really does seem to be this corrupted heart tree at the heart of the wall, and that really makes sense, right? The Kings of Winter are the Starks, the wall is kind of like their shield, their source of power comes from prophecy and magic relating to the wall and the threat beyond the wall. The wall and the others are essentially a power source for the Starks, in that everyone believes there must be a Stark in Winterfell, or the others will come back and defeat them somehow. So just with the lore that we have in the books, you have the Kings of Winter as the Starks, the Heart of Winter if it is within the wall, or if it's just the heart tree organism specifically, that's the magic source, that is the thing that the others were created from, that is the thing that the wall was created from. These are the things that have locked the Starks into their power this entire time. All of this, they are the Kings of Winter. It all just lines up, right? That this is what the Heart of Winter is, and this is what our Stark characters are going to have to deal with. Now, there may be some more work to do in the fandom, especially to figure out, okay, well, maybe there's a way to figure out, why does this winter last 3 years when this one lasts 1, when this one lasts 5? Why is this summer lasting 9 years? All of that stuff, maybe there is some sort of reason that we could piece together, but I think if you want to be going back and looking for clues, you should probably be viewing this as an irregular heartbeat of the planet situation. So what do you think of this explanation for Westeros' irregular seasons? A corrupted heartbeat of the planet due to the corrupted Heart of Winter, which is supposed to be a source of green magic, has been turned into a blood magic, shadow magic, weapon of war when there was a war between the children and the First Men, and George is basically making a big statement that using the powers of nature for war is a corruption of what they are meant for. It is a terrible thing to do, and if you do it, you will have problems. If you use the powers of nature to make weapons of mass destruction to fight your enemies, you're going to be having problems. You need to remove those weapons. You need to restore the natural balance and use these things for green magic. A green energy, free energy sort of hippie statement about the way the world should be. You should be focusing on making things better, growing things, building new things, but instead you have focused on war, and you have locked yourself into this system perpetuated by war, and you need to break the wheel. You need to break the system. You need to uncorrupt the heart of the planet and use it for what it was originally meant for, which is green magic, not blood magic. Trees should not have faces, nor leaves that look like human hands. You probably shouldn't be using these trees for sacrifice and green seeing. All of that, to me, feels like a message George could be setting up. So what do you think? Is that the reason that George R. R. Martin has planned this entire time for the seasons to be out of whack? Is it a corrupted heart of the world situation? Is that what we're setting up? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do so, and I will see you all with something else very soon.